Imagine a building. Imagine it in the heart of Milan, on the Corso Venezia, a street of quiet aristocratic elegance. It is not a palace in the grand Florentine sense. It is something more modern, more severe, a fortress of finance and fashion. Now, travel higher, up to the penthouse. The air changes here. The noise of the city recedes, replaced by a curated silence. Light pours through vast windows, illuminating museum-quality art, furniture so exquisitely designed it feels more like sculpture than something for a human body to rest upon. Every surface is perfect. Every line is clean. This is not a home. It is a statement, an architecture of total control. But this place is a paradox. It is a perfectly ordered space that became the stage for a profoundly disordered act. This penthouse, a monument to a man's vision of himself, is also a crime scene. It is a place of architectural schizophrenia, where immaculate taste and brutal violence coexist in the same memory, in the same square meters of marble and glass. This building should not hold the story it does. Its serene facade should not mask a tale of familial warfare, colossal ambition, and a love so corroded it could only end in a hail of bullets on a cold Monday morning. So we must ask, who was the man who built this golden cage for himself? What was he trying to prove, and to whom? How did a name synonymous with the highest form of luxury become entangled in a story of betrayal and murder worthy of a Renaissance vendetta? The walls of this penthouse, and of the many other houses that orbited it like captive planets, hold the answers. They were the silent witnesses to the spectacular rise and fall of the last Gucci to rule the Gucci empire. To understand the tragedy, we must first understand the man. And to understand the man, Maurizio Gucci, we must understand the kingdom he was born to inherit. He was not its creator, merely its prince. He was born in 1948, the only son of Rodolfo Gucci, an actor who had found more fame in the family business than on the silver screen. His grandfather was the patriarch Guccio Gucci, a man whose story is a parable of observation and ambition. Guccio was a hotel worker in London at the turn of the century, a porter at the Savoy. He was invisible, a ghost in the machine of luxury, but he was watching. He watched the aristocrats and the newly rich industrialists. He watched their luggage, the fine leather trunks and valises that were the silent signifiers of their status. He learned that the wealthy announced themselves not with words, but with objects. He returned to Florence and in 1921 opened a small shop. It was not a fashion house. It was a workshop for leather goods, for luggage, for the accessories of travel and the equestrian world. The quality was impeccable. The vision was humble, rooted in craftsmanship. But Guccio had 3 sons, Aldo, Vasco, and Rodolfo, and with sons comes complication. With sons comes the dilution of a singular vision. Aldo was the showman, the expansionist, the commercial genius who saw the future. Rodolfo was the aesthete, the conservative, the guardian of a more aristocratic European flame. From its first generation of succession, the Gucci empire was a house divided. Maurizio grew up in this divided house. He was raised by his father, Rodolfo, after his mother died when he was only 5. He was a quiet, handsome, somewhat awkward boy, living in the shadow of a reserved and melancholy father. Rodolfo's world was one of old-world elegance, of quiet luxury. He believed the Gucci name was something to be protected, to be polished, to be kept exclusive. His brother Aldo, who had moved to America, had a different philosophy. Aldo was a conqueror. He plastered the double G logo on everything he could: handbags, shoes, ashtrays, keychains. He opened hundreds of stores. He brought Gucci to the masses, or at least the upper middle classes. He made the family fantastically wealthy. But in Rodolfo's eyes, and soon in Maurizio's, he was cheapening the brand. He was turning their art into a commodity. This was the central conflict that defined Maurizio's existence. He was heir to a name that meant two opposite things at once: refined, artisanal heritage, and mass-market logo-driven status. His entire life would become a crusade to resolve this contradiction. His motivation was not simply to be rich. He was already rich beyond measure. His motivation was to purify the family name, to cleanse it of the commercial sins of his uncle. He saw himself as a reformer, a Medici prince destined to restore Florence to its former glory. He needed to wrest control from Aldo and his cousins, to erase their branch of the family from the narrative, and to remake Gucci in his own, more refined image. It was an ambition of breathtaking arrogance, a son's desire to edit his own family history. But a prince, even one with a grand vision, often needs a push. He needs a partner who can translate his abstract desires into concrete action. Maurizio found his in Patrizia Reggiani. She was a supernova in the muted world of Milanese society. She was not from old money. Her stepfather was a wealthy entrepreneur, and she had a reputation for being vivacious, demanding, and utterly captivating. When Maurizio first saw her at a party, he famously asked a friend, "Who is that beautiful girl in red who looks like Elizabeth Taylor?" They fell in love. Or perhaps their ambitions fell in love. In Maurizio, Patrizia saw a name, a legacy, an empire waiting to be claimed. In Patrizia, Maurizio found the confidence he lacked. She was his engine, his strategist, his cheerleader. She saw the king within the hesitant prince and urged him to claim his throne. Rodolfo was horrified. He saw Patrizia as a vulgar arriviste, a gold digger. He famously told Maurizio, "She is a social climber who has nothing in mind but money." He cut his son off, disowning him for choosing her. But the paternal opposition only solidified their union. It cast them as romantic rebels, a glamorous duo fighting against a stuffy, old-fashioned world. They married in 1972, a merger not just of two people, but of his legacy and her ferocious will. She began to whisper in his ear, telling him what he already believed, that Gucci was his birthright and that his family were merely obstacles. The war for Gucci had found its queen. The decision to build a life together was, for Maurizio and Patrizia, a decision to build a stage. Their homes were never just places to live. They were declarations of intent. They were strategic acquisitions in their campaign for social and corporate dominance. Before they could conquer the Gucci empire, they had to construct a world that made them look as if they already had. Their first major act was not a business move, but an architectural one. They acquired and meticulously curated a collection of properties that would serve as the backdrop for their ascent. Their command center was the penthouse in Milan. It was their throne room, their war room, their salon. They hired the best designers. The aesthetic was modern, but not cold. It was opulent, but tasteful. It was a careful calibration, designed to impress the old guard of Italian industry and the new wave of international finance. The art was chosen not just for its beauty, but for its power. The furniture was a testament to their knowledge of design history. This was not the fussy, antique-laden world of Rodolfo. This was the future. It was a space that said, "We are not our parents. We are the new Gucci." Every dinner party was a calculated performance, a gathering of allies, a subtle display of influence. The penthouse was a filter designed to let in only those who could be useful to their cause. The architectural psychology was clear. Maurizio was trying to build a reality that reflected his inner vision for the brand. He wanted Gucci to be sleek, modern, exclusive, and purged of the messy commercial clutter his uncle Aldo had introduced. His home had to be the prototype for this new kingdom. It was a physical manifestation of his desire for control. The vast open spaces, the clean lines, the curated objects, it was an environment where everything was in its place, chosen by him. It was a stark contrast to the chaotic state of the Gucci company, torn apart by lawsuits, family feuds, and creative stagnation. In his home, he could be the absolute monarch he dreamed of being in the boardroom. Then there was the chalet in Saint Moritz, the Winter Palace. This was a different kind of performance. Here they played the part of established, old-world aristocracy. The architecture was classic Alpine luxury, warm woods, roaring fireplaces, plush furs. It was a stage for a more relaxed, yet equally potent form of power. It was where they entertained bankers on ski holidays, where they mingled with European royalty. It was a house designed to communicate a sense of permanence, of belonging to a world of inherited privilege, a world that Patrizia, in particular, had not been born into. It was a brilliant piece of social camouflage. And for the ultimate statement, there was the yacht. Not just any yacht, but the Creole, a magnificent three-masted schooner with a history as dramatic as their own. Built in 1927, it was one of the largest and most beautiful sailing yachts ever made. Maurizio bought it and spent millions restoring it to its former glory. The Creole was not a toy. It was a floating embassy. It was a piece of history he could possess, a symbol of a bygone era of elegance that he sought to resurrect. Sailing the Mediterranean on the Creole was the ultimate performance of effortless grace. It was a weapon of style, designed to awe and intimidate. It declared that the Guccis were not just merchants. They were patrons of beauty, custodians of history, masters of the sea. The scale of this enterprise was staggering. The cost of acquiring, renovating, and maintaining this portfolio of properties ran into the tens of millions, then the hundreds of millions. An army of staff was required. Housekeepers, chefs, sailors, pilots. The logistics of moving between these perfect worlds were immense. But the expense was the point. It was a demonstration of financial power, a signal to the market and to their family rivals that they were a force to be reckoned with. Their lifestyle was a form of leverage. The central contrast in this entire production was the chasm between the serene, perfect surfaces of their lives and the brutal corporate warfare they were waging behind the scenes. Within the calm, art-filled walls of the Milan penthouse, they plotted the downfall of Maurizio's own family. They worked with lawyers and bankers to exploit family divisions. They used information gleaned from one cousin to undermine another. The beautiful homes were the headquarters for a meticulously planned coup. The opulence was not for comfort, it was for combat. It was the armor they wore into battle, the gilded fortress from which they would launch their attack to seize the Gucci crown. By the mid-1980s, the war was won. Through a series of brilliant, ruthless maneuvers, aided by the financial backing of the Bahrain-based investment firm Investcorp, Maurizio had achieved the impossible. He had systematically bought out his cousins and his uncle. The family feuds, the public lawsuits, the dilution of the brand. He had ended it all. In 1989, he became the chairman of the Gucci Group. He was the sole family member with executive power. He was the king. This was their golden age. The houses, once stages for their ambition, now became stages for their triumph. The Milan penthouse was the epicenter of a new social universe. The parties were legendary. Imagine the scene, the city lights of Milan twinkling below, a river of champagne flowing through rooms filled with the most powerful people in the world. fashion designers, movie stars, industrialists, financiers, journalists, they all came to pay their respects. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, Cuban cigars and victory, the rustle of silk dresses, and the low hum of influential conversations filled the perfectly designed spaces. Patrizia was in her element, the ultimate hostess, resplendent in jewels and couture, the queen surveying her court. Maurizio, more reserved but visibly proud, moved among his guests, the quiet center of this glittering world. The houses operated with the precision of a Swiss watch. Every detail was flawless. The staff were invisible yet omnipresent. The flower arrangements were changed daily. The cellars were stocked with the finest wines. This was the flawless world Maurizio had dreamed of creating, a world where everything was beautiful, everything was orderly, and everything was under his control. He was not just the chairman of a company, he was the curator of a lifestyle, and his homes were the flagship stores of his personal brand. This new status was the ultimate vindication. The very people who might have once looked down on Patrizia, the old money of Milan and Europe, who might have seen Maurizio as the soft heir to a commercial enterprise, now clamored for their invitations. They had successfully used their wealth and their homes to rewrite their own social standing. They had become not just rich, but important. They had power, and the world flocked to it. Maurizio began to implement his vision for the company, moving its headquarters from Florence to Milan, bringing in a new team of designers and executives, and starting the slow, expensive process of buying back the cheap licenses that had tarnished the brand's name. The strategy was working. The Gucci name was beginning to regain its lost luster, but even at the peak of their glory, there was a subtle foreshadowing of the emptiness to come. The houses were so grand, so perfect, so clearly designed for public performance that they began to lose the feeling of a private home. The penthouse could entertain 200 people with ease, but when the guests left, it could feel cavernous and lonely for just two. The constant performance of being the Guccis was an exhausting one. The relentless pursuit of perfection left little room for genuine human connection, for the messy, imperfect realities of a marriage. The golden cage they had built was exquisitely beautiful, but it was a cage nonetheless. The control Maurizio had craved for the company was a seductive force, and it began to creep into his personal life. He had won the war for Gucci, but a new, more insidious conflict was just beginning, right inside the walls of his perfect home. The perfect world was built on a fragile foundation, and that foundation was money. Not the family money he had inherited, but borrowed money. The campaign to take over Gucci had been colossally expensive, and the vision to revitalize it was even more so. Maurizio spent with the reckless abandon of a monarch who believes his resources are infinite. He moved the headquarters, commissioned a lavish new office building, and poured hundreds of millions into buying back licenses and revamping stores. The company, under his leadership, was hemorrhaging cash. Artistically, his vision was sound. Financially, it was a catastrophe. The bankers at InvestCorp, the silent partners who had funded his ascent, began to grow nervous. The abstract antagonist of reality, in the form of balance sheets and profit warnings, was beginning to breach the walls of his gilded fortress. But the first, most devastating crack in the facade was not financial. It was personal. The partnership that had conquered an empire began to crumble under the weight of its own success. Maurizio, now the undisputed king, no longer needed his queen in the same way. The man Patrizia had molded into a titan of industry was now a titan who resented being molded. He grew distant, spending more time on the Creole or in St. Moritz, often alone. The dynamic had shifted. He was in control now, and he wanted to control everything, including the terms of his own marriage. The personal tragedy, when it came, was delivered with a cold, almost surgical cruelty. In 1985, Maurizio packed a small suitcase, telling Patrizia he was going on a short business trip to Florence. He kissed her goodbye. He never came back. A few days later, he sent a family friend, the doctor, to the penthouse to deliver the news. The doctor stood in the magnificent living room, a space that had witnessed so many of their shared triumphs, and informed Patrizia that the marriage was over and her husband would not be returning. It was not a confrontation. It was an abdication, a quiet, devastating coup in their personal life that mirrored the corporate one he had staged against his family. This act of abandonment was Patrizia's public execution. She was not just losing a husband, she was being exiled from the kingdom she had helped build. She was being stripped of her identity. For years she had been Signora Gucci, a title she had wielded with immense pride and skill. Now she was being demoted, cast aside for a younger, blonder woman, Paola Franchi, an interior designer with whom Maurizio had started a new life. The humiliation was absolute. The thematic shift in their world was immediate and brutal. The houses, once symbols of their shared power, were instantly transformed. The Milan penthouse became Maurizio's fortress, a place Patrizia was legally barred from entering. For her, its windows now looked like the cold, indifferent eyes of a monster that had swallowed her life whole. The chalet in St. Moritz, the yacht, the villas, they were all part of his new world, a world from which she was violently excluded. They became monuments to her loss, constant, painful reminders of the life that had been stolen from her. The house of triumph had become for her a house of obsession, a house of rage. She stalked its perimeters, her anger festering, her desire for revenge growing with every passing day she spent on the outside, looking in. Maurizio's fall from grace was as swift as his ascent. His profligate spending finally caught up with him. By 1993, the Gucci company was in financial ruin, losing hundreds of millions of dollars. The very bankers who had once toasted his success now saw him as a liability. In a final, humiliating boardroom showdown, InvestCorp forced him out. They compelled him to sell his remaining shares in the company for a reported $170 million. It was a vast sum of money, but it was a pittance compared to what the company would soon be worth. More importantly, it was the price of his abdication. He had lost everything. He had won the war against his family, only to lose the kingdom to his financiers. The last Gucci to run Gucci was gone. He was an emperor with no empire, left with only the hollow, beautiful shells of his former life, the houses, the yacht, and the crushing weight of his failure. After the great unraveling, the houses themselves began a new, strange chapter in their lives. The empire was gone, the king was deposed, and the queen was in exile. The properties which had been so central to the Gucci myth were now just assets to be managed, sold, or forgotten. What happens to a stage when the play has ended? What becomes of a palace when the dynasty has fallen? The great emptying began almost immediately. The Milan penthouse, the epicenter of the drama, was where Maurizio lived with his new partner, Paola Franchi. But it was no longer the vibrant court of a fashion monarch. It was a quieter, more isolated place. Its grand rooms, designed for crowds, now felt oversized, haunted by the ghosts of past triumphs. After his murder on its very steps in 1995, the penthouse became something else entirely, a piece of evidence, a location in a police report. It was eventually sold, its connection to the Gucci saga becoming both a selling point and a dark stain. Its future owners would always live within the echo of that story, sleeping in rooms where a decade of ambition and a night of plotting had changed fashion history forever. The other properties were scattered like the spoils of a lost war. The magnificent yacht, the Creole, which had cost Maurizio a fortune to restore and maintain, was sold. It was too potent a symbol of the life he had lost, a life of boundless expense he could no longer afford. The chalet in St. Moritz, the villas in the sun, they too passed into other hands, their walls carrying the secrets of the deals and dalliances that had taken place within them. The contents, the carefully chosen art, the bespoke furniture, the physical evidence of their impeccable taste were auctioned off or divided. The lifeblood was drained from the houses, leaving only the beautiful architectural bones. They became time capsules of a specific, decadent era that had come to a violent and premature end. The most ironic repurposing was not of any single house, but of the name itself. The penthouse on Corso Venezia became infamous. It ceased to be known for its parties and became known for the assassination that occurred at its entrance. The building's original intent, to project an image of serene, untouchable power, was grotesquely inverted. It now projected notoriety, tragedy, and the brutal reality that no amount of wealth can build a wall high enough to keep the world out. It became a dark landmark on the tourist map of Milan, a place where elegance and violence had collided, and yet the House of Gucci, the brand, the corporation, survived. It not only survived, it thrived in a way that must have seemed a cruel joke to the family that had created it. Freed from the chaotic grip of the Gucci family and the financial mismanagement of Maurizio, the company, now under the control of InvestCorp and the creative genius of a young designer named Tom Ford, was reborn. It became sexier, more profitable, and more powerful than ever before. It became a global behemoth. This was the ultimate irony. Maurizio's core vision of a singular, elite, desirable brand was correct, but he was the wrong man to see it through. He was the necessary sacrifice. The house survived, grander than ever, but it had to be emptied of its original inhabitants first. Today, the story has settled into a kind of myth. The Gucci brand is a titan of global luxury, a multi-billion-dollar corporation owned by the French conglomerate Kering. Its connection to the founding family is one of heritage and marketing, a story told in museums and on its website, but not a lived reality. The family is gone. Patrizia Reggiani, convicted of ordering her husband's murder, served 16 years in prison. Dubbed the Black Widow by the Italian press, she is now free, a strange and unsettling footnote in the story she once dominated. The daughters, Allegra and Alessandra, inherited their father's fortune and live quiet, fiercely private lives in Switzerland, far from the glare of the name that is both their birthright and their burden. The houses are all owned by strangers, the quiet elegance of their architecture belying the turbulent history they contain. It is impossible not to see this story as a modern European version of The Great Gatsby. Maurizio, like Jay Gatsby, was a man consumed by a dream. He built a world of breathtaking beauty and expense, not just for himself, but to win a certain kind of status, a certain kind of ideal. He threw lavish parties in magnificent houses, believing that if he could just perfect the stage, he could control the play. He believed that his wealth and his vision could rewrite the messy history of his family and secure a perfect future. But like Gatsby, he found that the past is never dead, and that the dream, when built on a foundation of hubris and borrowed money, is destined to shatter. He was reaching for a green light across the water, the light of a pure, perfect, aristocratic Gucci. and he was consumed by that quest. This story resonates so deeply today because the Guccis were pioneers of a very modern affliction, the relentless curation of the self. They did not just live their lives, they designed them, they branded them, they performed them. Their homes were the original Instagram feeds, carefully composed snapshots of a perfect existence designed to inspire envy and awe. Their tragedy is a powerful cautionary tale about the dangerous space between image and reality, between the brand you build and the person you are. What happens when the facade becomes more important than the foundation? What happens when you succeed in becoming a legend only to lose yourself in the process? Maurizio Gucci won control of his family's name, but in the end, he lost the ability to control his own fate. In the end, what is a name? For the Gucci family, it was a kingdom to be conquered, a religion to be worshipped, and a curse that pitted brother against brother, husband against wife. They built palaces of leather and silk, monuments to their own taste and power, but the foundations were riddled with the oldest and most potent of human frailties: greed, pride, jealousy, and a love so twisted it could only be expressed through murder. The story of Maurizio and Patrizia is not really about fashion. It is a timeless operatic tragedy that reminds us that no fortune is large enough, no wall high enough to protect us from ourselves. The houses remain, silent, beautiful, and utterly indifferent to the human dramas that played out within them. They stand as monuments not to a brand's enduring success, but to a family's spectacular and very human failure.